The bell above the door of Merrow's trading post had not rung true in 11 years. It hung crooked on its bracket, brass gone dull as a coin left too long in the dirt, and when the wind caught it, it made a sound like something apologizing for existing. Everyone in Split Creek believed alias Merrow wanted a wife, because a man needs a woman in the house, because the shelves were dusty and the ledgers were crooked, and a bachelor past 30 was a strange and slightly suspicious thing on the frontier. That was what everyone believed. What Elias needed, though he could not have said it plainly even to himself, was something closer to proof that the life his father had built was still worth keeping. The post sat at the crossroads where the old stage line met the freight road, and it had once been the loudest, brightest place for 40 miles, a spot where drovers stopped and homesteaders traded and children pressed their noses to the glass over the candy jar. Now the road brought fewer wagons every season because the railroad had gone through 8 miles south, and the freight company that ran it was owned by a man named Callum Drayton, a man who smiled like he was doing you a favor just by looking at you. Elias worked from before light to past dark, hauling freight himself, to make up what the store no longer earned, and there was no one left to mind the counter, so the counter mostly stayed empty. He placed the advertisement in a city paper on a whim he was almost ashamed of, 3 lines asking for a capable woman willing to keep books and manage a trading post. Marriage required, no romantics need apply. He told himself it was a business arrangement the way a man tells himself a great many things to keep from naming the shape of his own loneliness. He did not expect an answer from someone like Naomi Hale. If you have ever wondered what it looks like when someone shows up exactly on time to change everything, stay with this one to the end. She arrived on the same coach that brought the mail, carrying 1 trunk, 1 ledger book of her own, and a composure that made the driver tip his hat twice before he could think better of it. She did not smile when she stepped down. She looked at the post the way an appraiser looks at a piece of land before deciding what it is worth, taking in the sagging porch, the faded sign, the crooked bell, and something in her face settled, not with disappointment, but with the particular calm of a person who has seen worse and made peace with fixing things rather than admiring them. Elias came out wiping his hands on a rag, and for a moment neither of them said anything because there was nothing simple to say. Finally she asked him a single question. Not about the wedding, not about the arrangement, but about the ledgers, whether they were current or whether she would need 3 days to make sense of them before she could be of any use. He told her 3 days would not be enough. She told him that was fine. She had never needed more time than a thing actually required, only more time than people expected her to need. It was, he would think later, the first true thing either of them said to the other, and it told him more about her than 100 pleasant words could have. She moved into the small room, off the back of the store, and within a week the store did not look like the same building. Not because she had spent money since there was none to spend, but because she had reorganized what already existed with a mind that seemed built for the exact shape of the work. She moved the flour and salt where a tired arm could reach them without stretching. She put the tools a farmer would need closest to the door, so a man in a hurry did not have to walk past every shelf to find what he came for. She kept the books in a hand so clean and so honest that when old Sully Aldern came through with a load of hides, he stood at the counter blinking at the columns like he was reading scripture. Sully was the kind of man who said out loud what everyone else in Split Creek was only thinking, and what he said, chewing on the end of an unlit pipe, was that Elias Merrow had gone and married a woman smarter than the both of them combined, and the town had better get used to it. Elias did not argue. He had already noticed. What he noticed most, though, was not her cleverness with numbers, but the way she extended credit, not carelessly, but with a kind of fierce fairness that had been missing from the post since his father's health failed. She would look a struggling homesteader in the eye and tell him plainly what he owed, what he could pay now, and what could wait, and somehow that plain honesty did more to bring people back through the door than any bargain ever had. Within a month, wagons that had been passing the crossroads without stopping began to slow. Within 2, they began to stop on purpose. The bell, which had rung crooked and apologetic for over a decade, began to ring so often that Elias found himself listening for it, the way another man might listen for rain after a long drought, not with hope, exactly not yet, but with something dangerously close to it. Their life together took the shape of routine, long before it took the shape of anything softer. She kept the books, he kept the freight and the repairs, and in the evenings they sat at the same table and ate whatever had been simplest to cook, talking mostly about accounts owed and roads washed out and whether the roof would hold through another winter. It was not romantic in the way stories usually claimed romance ought to be, and yet there was something in the particular quiet between them, something that grew heavier and more comfortable at the same time, the way a good coat grows heavier with wear until you stop noticing the weight and only notice the warmth. He watched her hands as she worked the ledger by lamplight, quick and sure, and he began to understand that a woman could show more of herself in the way she balanced a column of numbers than in any declaration she might have made. She watched him carry sacks of grain that should have needed 2 men, watched him mend the same hinge 4 times because he refused to spend money on a new one while there was still a season's worth of use left in the old. And she began to understand that a man could love something, could love someone entirely through labor and reliability, without ever once saying the word. But even as the store filled with customers, and even as the crooked bell rang more in a single week than it had rung in a year before her arrival, Elias noticed small things he could not quite place. Letters came for her addressed in a hand he did not recognize, and she would read them at the far end of the counter with her back half turned, and afterward the fire in the stove would take a letter's worth of paper sooner than it should have. When a stranger asked her name in passing, just making conversation, she answered a beat too slowly, as though she were choosing which name to give. Once, when a freight agent from Drayton's company came through to collect on an old note, he looked at her the way a man looks at something he is almost certain he has seen before, but cannot place. And she turned away to fetch a ledger she did not need, and did not turn back until he had gone. Elias did not ask. It was not in his nature to demand what a person was not ready to give, and there was a part of him, quiet and afraid, that did not want an answer that might undo the good thing that had, against every expectation, begun to grow between them. So he watched, and he waited, and he kept the store running, and he told himself that whatever she carried, she would set it down in her own time, the way a person sets down a heavy trunk only once they trust there is somewhere safe to put it. The trouble came, as trouble on the frontier so often did, wearing a fine coat and a reasonable smile. Callum Drayton rode up to the post himself one gray afternoon, the kind of afternoon that smelled like rain long before any fell, and he stepped inside as though he already owned the floor beneath his boots. He complimented the shelves. He complimented the ledgers, which he asked to see under the guise of settling an old account. And Elias, who had no reason yet to refuse him, showed him. Drayton's eyes moved down the columns and then up to Naomi, standing at the far end of the counter with her arms folded, and something passed across his face, brief and cold, the look of a man recalculating an old sum he had believed, long since closed. He said her name. Not the name Elias knew her by, but another, quieter, testing it the way a man tests ice before he steps on it. She did not flinch, but Elias saw her knuckles whiten where her arms were folded, and he understood, in that instant, that whatever history existed between them was not small, and it was not finished. That night, after Drayton had gone, Elias asked her plainly the way he asked most things, without ornament. He asked who Drayton believed she was. For a long moment she said nothing, and the lamp between them hissed low, and outside the wind worked at the loose boards on the porch the way it always did before rain. Then she told him. She had once kept the books for Drayton's freight company, back before it grew into the empire it was becoming, and in that work she had found what she was never meant to find, a second set of figures hidden beneath the first, showing that homesteaders and small freighters alike were being cheated on weight and measure, their debts inflated. Their land notes called due years before they should have been, all of it dressed up in numbers, clean enough to fool any circuit judge who did not know where to look. She had known where to look. When she tried to bring it forward, Drayton had been faster, accusing her of theft, of altering the very ledger she had only ever tried to protect, and she had run, rather than stand trial in a county where his money reached further than any truth could. She had kept the real ledger. It was in the bottom of her trunk, wrapped in a shawl she never wore, and she had carried it across 3 territories, the way another woman might carry a photograph of someone she lost. Elias asked her only one question, and it was not whether she had done it, because he already knew by then that she had not. He asked why she had never told him. She looked at him for a long moment, and her voice was steady, though quieter than usual, and she said that she had wanted just once in her life to be trusted for who she was in the room, and not for what she could prove about her past. He did not answer with words. He reached across the table and set his rough hand over hers and let it rest there, and that was answer enough for both of them, though neither said so aloud. Drayton did not wait long to move. Within the week, a rider came bearing a formal notice that the note on Merrow's trading post, an old debt from Elias's father, that had passed quietly from bank to bank until it landed, as such things so often did, in Drayton's hands, was being called due in full, payable within the month, or the post and the land beneath it would pass to the freight company by right of forfeiture. It was not a coincidence, and everyone in Split Creek knew it was not a coincidence, though no one dared say Drayton's name too loudly in his own territory. Elias sat with the notice in his hands for a long while that evening, and Naomi sat across from him, and neither pretended the trouble was small. She told him plainly that she would leave if it would save the post, that her presence was the reason the debt had been called, and that she had learned in her time running from Drayton's reach exactly how much a man like that would spend to erase an inconvenience. Elias set the notice down on the table between them, and he was quiet for a long moment, the kind of quiet that in another man might have looked like hesitation, but in him was only the shape of a decision already made and simply being weighed one final time for its cost. He told her that his father had built the post on a promise that no one who came through its door honestly would ever be cheated at his counter, and that he did not intend to let it fall into the hands of a man who had broken that same promise to 100 others. He told her, in words plainer than any vow, that he was not sending her anywhere. She did not answer right away, and when she did, her voice was rough in a way. He had not heard from her before, and she said only 2 words, that she understood, though what he heard in them was something closer to a lifetime of gratitude finally allowed to surface. They did not run, and they did not hide the ledger any longer. Instead, Elias sent word through Sully, who could carry news faster and further than any rider Drayton employed, calling every freighter, homesteader, and small trader in the county who had ever suspected they'd been cheated on weight or measure to gather at the post on the day the circuit judge came through Split Creek on his regular rounds. It was a risk that could have ended in nothing but embarrassment. A store owner and his new wife standing before a crowd with an old ledger and a grudge, easily dismissed by a man with Drayton's money and reputation. But Naomi laid the true ledger on the counter in front of the judge, page by page. Column matched against column from Drayton's own official books, which several of the gathered men had brought forward without needing to be asked twice, since more than one of them had quietly kept copies of their own final tallies over the years. Suspicious in a way they had never had proof enough to act on, the numbers told the story on their own, patient and undeniable, the way numbers always do. Once someone finally lines them up correctly, Drayton stood at the back of the crowd with his fine coat and his reasonable smile, and for the first time since Elias had known him, neither did him any good at all. The judge did not need long to see what was there. Naomi's name was cleared before the week was out. The theft charge that had chased her across 3 territories struck from the record once the truth of the hidden ledger came to light, and the debt Drayton had called due against the post was declared void, built as it was on figures no honest court could uphold. Drayton left Split Creek not long after his freight company's reach, quietly shortened by men in other counties who had heard by then exactly what kind of scales he kept behind his own counter. The post did not simply survive. It thrived in the plain, steady way that things thrive when they are built on honesty rather than luck. wagons stopping at the crossroads, not because there was nowhere else to go, but because word had traveled that Merrow's was the one place a person could trade and know exactly what they were getting for it. Elias fixed the bell that winter, not by replacing it, but by straightening the bracket his father had hung crooked decades before. And the first time it rang true and clear over the sound of a full store, he stood still for a moment just to listen, the way a man listens to something he had stopped believing he would ever hear. Naomi came to stand beside him at the counter, not because there was work to be done in that moment, but because there wasn't, and for once neither of them needed there to be. Outside, wagons rolled up the frontier road toward the crossroads, drawn by nothing more than the plain, unglamorous truth that here, finally, was a place where a person's word still meant exactly what it said, and the bell above the door rang on steady now, the way a promise sounds, once it has finally been kept.